I drove 7 hours through a brutal sleet storm to attend my family Thanksgiving dinner, carrying a custom roasted turkey, only to have the front door blocked by my own mother. She looked me up and down and told me there was no room at the table for me. I did not scream or beg for a seat. I just smiled, walked back to my car, and permanently stopped paying the mortgage on the mansion they were sitting in. 10 days later, my phone lit up with a text demanding I pay their bill. My reply was the beginning of the end for their fake high society lives. My name is Kiara, and I am 32 years old. For most of my life, I was considered the black sheep of my elite Atlanta family. In the wealthy enclaves of Buckhead, appearances are everything. My parents, Vivian and Desmond, built their entire identities around the illusion of black excellence. It was all about country club memberships, alumni networking, and designer labels they could not actually afford. While my siblings followed the exact paths my parents laid out for them, I chose a different route. I built a crisis management and public relations firm in Washington, D.C. from the ground up. I worked brutal hours and quietly amassed a fortune in real estate and corporate contracts. But to my family, I was just a stubborn girl with a lowly assistant job who refused to conform. I thought this Thanksgiving would be different. I wanted to bridge the gap. I had spent days preparing a custom truffle-roasted turkey, a recipe I learned from a private chef client of mine. I carefully wrapped it to keep it warm and loaded it into my reliable but unremarkable hybrid sedan. The drive from DC to Atlanta took over 7 hours due to a massive sleet storm that covered the highways in ice. My knuckles ached from gripping the steering wheel, but I kept picturing a warm family gathering. I imagined the smell of cinnamon and spices, the sound of laughter, and a rare moment of genuine connection with the people who raised me. I pulled into the grand circular driveway of my childhood home, exhausted but hopeful. The mansion was glowing with lights, looking like a picture from a luxury lifestyle magazine. I balanced the heavy roasting pan in my hands and walked up the sweeping brick steps. The front door swung open before I could even ring the bell. My mother Vivian stood there in a flawless silk dress, a string of pearls resting against her collarbone. She did not smile. She did not offer to help me with the heavy food I was carrying. Instead, her eyes darted from my practical winter coat down to my sensible boots with sheer disdain. "Hello, Mom," I said, shifting the pan to ease the ache in my arms. The roads were terrible, but I made it. I brought the turkey I promised. Vivian blocked the entrance, crossing her arms over her chest. "What are you wearing?" she asked, her voice laced with disgust. "You look like you just finished a shift at a diner." I drove through a blizzard, Mom. I was focused on staying alive, not walking a runway. "Can I come in?" She did not move. She glanced back over her shoulder into the brightly lit foyer, then looked at me with cold calculation. "The table is set for 12, Kiara. Darnell invited his VIP banking partners and their wives tonight. We need to make a flawless impression for his career. There is simply no room for you at the adult table." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline of a joke that never came. "No room? I drove 7 hours. You should have planned better." She sighed impatiently. "Take your food around to the back and leave it in the kitchen. You can sit on a stool in the pantry and eat the leftovers after the guests are served, or you can just drive back to DC. I cannot have you ruining the aesthetic of the evening in front of Darnell's colleagues." My heart pounded against my ribs. I looked past her shoulder and saw my younger sister, Nia. Nia was the undisputed golden child, a lifestyle influencer whose entire online persona was funded by my parents. She was standing by the grand staircase wearing a designer gown, sipping an expensive glass of champagne. Beside her stood her husband, Trey. Trey was a self-proclaimed cryptocurrency entrepreneur who had never actually made a dime, but he certainly knew how to spend other people's money. Trey noticed me at the door and sauntered over, swirling the champagne in his glass. "Hey, Kiara," he smirked. "Do me a favor and move your beat-up sedan to the back alley. You are blocking the driveway, and I do not want your clunker scratching the paint on my brand-new Porsche." Nia giggled loudly from the stairs. "Do not be mean, Trey. She probably needs to sleep in that car tonight since there are no extra bedrooms. We needed the guest rooms for our wardrobe changes." My older brother Darnell walked into the foyer flanked by his wife Jada. Darnell was a mid-level loan manager at a local bank, but he carried himself like he owned the Federal Reserve. Jada was wearing a dress that cost more than her monthly salary. They glanced at me standing in the freezing cold holding a roasted turkey. Really? Kiara Darnell shook his head. You always have to bring the mood down. We are hosting elite professionals tonight. Just go to the kitchen and stay out of sight. You are embarrassing us. Not a single one of them offered me a warm greeting. Not one of them asked if I was safe after driving through the ice. They looked at me like I was the hired help, a nuisance intruding on their fabricated paradise. I stood on the freezing porch, the icy wind biting at my face, and looked at the magnificent crystal chandelier hanging in their foyer. I looked at the imported marble floors and the sweeping mahogany staircase. I looked at the roof over their heads. 4 years ago, that roof was almost ripped away from them. My father Desmond had made a series of disastrous investments trying to keep up with his wealthy fraternity brothers. The bank had sent a notice of foreclosure. My parents were days away from being thrown out onto the street, their precious social standing completely destroyed. They had called me crying, begging for salvation. I was the only one who had the actual liquid cash to save them. I paid the massive lump sum to pull the house out of foreclosure. But I did not stop there. Because I knew they were financially irresponsible, I quietly took over the monthly mortgage payments. For 48 consecutive months, I had transferred exactly $4,500 from my private corporate account directly to the lender. I had spent over $216,000 keeping the illusion of their wealth alive. I bought Trey's new Porsche indirectly by freeing up my parents' credit cards. I funded Nia's designer bags. I financed Darnell's arrogant lifestyle. I was the invisible foundation holding up their entire world, and they had just told me to go eat scraps in the pantry. The old Kiara, the one desperate for a scrap of maternal affection, would have cried. She would have walked around to the back door, sat in the kitchen, and hoped they would eventually invite her out to join them. But the woman standing on that porch was the CEO of a highly successful crisis management firm. I handled corporate disasters for breakfast. I did not tolerate disrespect, and I certainly did not fund it. I looked at Vivian's smug, unyielding face. I looked at Trey's arrogant smirk. I felt an incredible icy calm wash over my entire body. You know what, Mom? I said, my voice perfectly steady. You are absolutely right. I am severely underdressed for such a prestigious gathering, and I would hate to ruin Darnell's networking opportunity. Vivian looked slightly relieved, assuming I was bowing to her authority as usual. I am glad you understand, Kiara. Just leave the pan on the console table and see yourself out. I stepped inside just far enough to place the heavy roasting pan gently on the imported marble table. The rich scent of truffle and roasted garlic filled the air, a sharp contrast to the bitter cold outside. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you, I said, offering them a bright, flawless smile. Enjoy your dinner. I turned around, walked down the brick steps, and headed straight to my car. I ignored Trey yelling at me again to move my vehicle faster. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and turned on the engine. The heater blasted warm air against my freezing hands. Before I put the car in drive, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I opened my secure banking application. I navigated to the recurring transfers section. There it was, the lifeline I had provided for 4 long years. $4,500 scheduled to withdraw on the first of every month. I tapped the screen. A prompt asked if I was sure I wanted to cancel this recurring payment. I tapped confirm. The authorization vanished from the screen. The financial umbilical cord was officially cut. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the grand estate, leaving them to their champagne and their fake wealth. I checked into a luxury suite at a downtown hotel, ordered a massive steak from room service, and enjoyed the most peaceful Thanksgiving of my entire adult life. I spent the weekend relaxing at the hotel spa before catching a quick flight back to Washington, D.C., leaving my car in long-term parking. The fallout did not happen immediately. It took exactly 10 days for the consequences of their arrogance to finally catch up with them. I was sitting in my corner office on a crisp Tuesday morning, looking out over the city skyline, sipping a freshly brewed espresso. My phone vibrated on the glass desk. The screen lit up with a message from Vivian. The mortgage is due today, Kiara. We bought Nia a new Hermes bag for her anniversary, so we are short on cash. The bank said your automatic transfer did not go through. Fix whatever glitch is happening and send the transfer immediately. We have a charity gala to plan. There was no apology for Thanksgiving. There was no inquiry about whether I made it home safely. It was just a cold, entitled demand for my money. I picked up my phone, feeling the full weight of the empire I had built, and prepared to send the reply that would burn their fake world to the ground completely and forever. I set my espresso down on the glass desk and picked up my phone. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I did not write a long paragraph explaining my feelings. I did not demand an apology for Thanksgiving. I simply typed 6 words that would shatter their entire reality. Not my house, not my problem. I hit send and watched the message mark as delivered. It took less than 30 seconds for the family group chat to absolutely explode. My screen lit up with a rapid-fire barrage of notifications. The chat, named the Elite Buckhead family, was suddenly the most active it had been in months. Vivian responded first with a flurry of angry red-faced emojis. "What are you talking about?" she typed. "Stop playing these childish games, Kiara. Call the bank right now and fix your card." Before I could even read the next message, my phone started ringing aggressively. The caller ID flashed with the name of my father, Desmond. I let it ring 3 times before I finally tapped the green answer button and put him on speakerphone. "Kiara, what is wrong with you, Desmond?" bellowed his deep voice, echoing through my spacious corner office. "Have you lost your absolute mind? You do not talk to your mother that way." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. "I am not playing games, Dad," I said calmly. "I canceled the recurring transfer. I will no longer be paying the mortgage on a house where I am not even allowed to sit at the dining table." Desmond gasped loudly on the other end of the line. "You ungrateful little brat," he yelled. "You are a complete disgrace to Black excellence. We sacrificed everything for you. We gave you a prestigious name. We put a roof over your head when you were a child. This is how you repay us. You are going to let your own family get thrown out onto the street just because your feelings got hurt over a dinner seating arrangement." I let him rant. I listened to him spew his manipulative venom. He talked about sacrifices, but he conveniently forgot that I paid my own way through college, using academic scholarships and working 3 different jobs. He forgot that I paid off my own student loans while he was busy buying expensive golf clubs and hosting lavish parties for his fraternity brothers. "I sacrificed everything, Dad," I corrected him, my voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "I paid $216,000 to keep you from becoming the laughingstock of Atlanta. You have not sacrificed a single dime for me since I turned 18. I hung up the phone before he could scream another insult at me. The moment I ended the call, the group chat flared back to life. My younger sister Nia had apparently been briefed on the situation. She sent a voice note that was dripping with fake tears and pure selfishness. "Kiara, how could you do this to me?" she whined, her voice pitching high. "You know Trey and I are planning our massive baby shower for next month. If Mom and Dad lose the mansion, where are we going to host it? We already sent out the digital invitations to all my influencer friends. You are being completely unreasonable and incredibly selfish right now." Trey quickly followed up with a message of his own. "Listen here, Kiara, you need to wire that cash right now. I have potential investors coming to the house next week to pitch my new crypto coin. I cannot have bank foreclosure notices taped to the front door. You are messing with my bag. Stop throwing a temper tantrum and act like an adult." Then came my older brother Darnell and his snobby wife Jada. They were furious that their perceived safety net was suddenly being yanked away. Darnell typed a long, threatening paragraph. "You think you are so smart, Kiara. You are just a lowly assistant making pennies in Washington, D.C. If you do not transfer that money by noon today, Jada and I are going to expose you on social media. We will tell everyone what a terrible, ungrateful daughter you are. We will tag your little employer and ruin your reputation. You will lose your job and be out on the street right alongside us." Jada added her own toxic contribution. That is right, she typed. I will personally email your human resources department. I will tell them you are financially abusing your elderly parents. Do not test us, Kiara. We have connections. We will destroy your little assistant career before the day is over. I read their ridiculous threats and let out a genuine laugh. They were threatening to ruin my career by calling the human resources department of a company that I actually owned. They wanted to destroy the reputation of the top crisis management public relations expert in the country. It was like watching toddlers trying to threaten a military general with plastic water guns. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with, or the massive amount of power I truly held. I did not argue with them. I did not try to explain my position or defend my actions. Explanations are for people who deserve your time, and they had proven they deserved absolutely nothing from me. I opened the group chat settings. I selected the option to leave the group permanently. Then I went into my contacts and systematically blocked the phone numbers of Vivian, Desmond, Nia Trey Darnell, and Jada. I blocked them on every single social media platform. I completely severed their access to me in less than 60 seconds. The sudden silence in my office was beautiful. I placed my phone face down on the glass desk and took a deep breath. The toxicity that had suffocated me for my entire life was finally blocked out. I turned my attention back to my glowing computer monitor. I had a multi-million-dollar public relations contract to review for a major tech conglomerate. My business was thriving. My bank accounts were overflowing. My life was moving forward at lightning speed. But I knew exactly what was happening back in Atlanta. I knew how the banking system operated because my crisis management firm often dealt with massive financial institutions. The clock was officially ticking. The mortgage payment was due today. The bank would allow a 30-day grace period before the situation became critically dire. During those 30 days, my parents would scramble frantically. They would try to borrow money from their wealthy friends, only to be rejected because everyone in their circle was just as broke and pretending to be rich as they were. They would try to take out new credit cards only to be denied because their debt-to-income ratio was catastrophic. I knew that somewhere in a corporate banking office, a notice of default was already queued up in the automated system. Once that 30-day grace period expired, the bank would officially begin the foreclosure process. The notice would be printed, placed in a formal envelope, and mailed directly to the grand Buckhead estate. The perfect facade of black excellence that Vivian and Desmond had sacrificed their own daughter to maintain was going to shatter into a million pieces. They thought I was bluffing. They genuinely believed that I would eventually cave to the pressure and turn the financial faucet back on. They assumed my guilt would override my common sense, but they severely underestimated the profound transformation that had taken place inside me. I was no longer their compliant little victim. I controlled everything. I took another sip of my espresso, savoring the rich, bitter flavor. Let them threaten me, I thought to myself. Let them panic. Let them realize that the golden goose has finally flown away. The storm was coming for them, and they had absolutely no umbrella. They were about to learn a very harsh lesson in financial literacy and personal accountability. For years, they had used my quiet nature against me, mistaking my generosity for weakness. They assumed my silence meant I was blind to their manipulation. But every time I paid that mortgage, I kept detailed records. I knew the exact legal standing of that property. I knew more about their financial ruin than they did. The 30 days would pass quickly. The panic in that sprawling mansion would reach a boiling point. And when they finally realized the money was truly gone, they would do exactly what desperate, toxic people always do. They would try to attack the very person who used to save them. But this time I was completely ready for them. I welcomed the war with wide open arms and a strategy they could never defeat. They wanted to play foolish little games with my adult life, but they did not know I already owned the entire board and every single piece on it. I took exactly 14 days for their manufactured reality to crack under the immense weight of their financial incompetence. I knew they would not go down quietly. Desperate people rarely do. My security team at the Washington, D.C. headquarters had already been given strict instructions regarding uninvited guests. I knew my family would eventually try to weaponize my employment against me. In their minds, I was just an insignificant administrative assistant fetching coffee for important executives. They genuinely believed that threatening my fictional low-level job would terrify me into submission. They thought the threat of public humiliation in a corporate lobby would break my spirit and force me to reopen my bank accounts to them. They were spectacularly wrong. On a freezing Tuesday morning, my desk phone chimed with a direct line call from the head of building security. He informed me that 4 highly agitated individuals matching the descriptions I had provided were currently causing a massive disturbance in the main lobby. Vivian, Desmond, Nia, and Trey had actually driven 7 hours from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. just to ambush me at work. The sheer audacity of their plan was almost impressive. I did not rush downstairs immediately. I took my time finishing a delicate email to a high-profile client. I checked my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass window. My custom-tailored Tom Ford power suit fit flawlessly. I slipped on my heels, checked my posture, and walked gracefully toward my private executive elevator. Down in the massive marble lobby, the scene was unfolding exactly as I had predicted. I watched them through the discreet security monitors inside the elevator before the doors opened. Trey was slamming his fist against the imported stone reception desk. His face was red with anger as he shouted at the polite receptionist. "Listen to me, you glorified Secretary Trey," bellowed his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I demand to speak with the Human Resources Manager right now. We are the family of Kiara, and we have serious complaints about her character. She is financially abusing her elderly parents, and we want her terminated immediately. Do you know who we are? We are the elite of Atlanta. Get her boss down here right now before I make a phone call and have you all fired." Vivian stood right behind him, clutching her fake designer handbag, trying to look like a distressed victim of elder abuse. She was dramatically dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. "She needs to be taught a harsh lesson in respect," Vivian loudly proclaimed to the growing crowd of curious employees waiting for their morning coffee. "She stole from us and abandoned us. We need to speak with the owner of this company. We will not leave this lobby until she is escorted out of this building with all her belongings in a cardboard box." Nia was holding up her smartphone, recording the entire embarrassing spectacle for her social media followers. She was providing live commentary about toxic sisters and seeking justice for her parents. Desmond stood with his chest puffed out, attempting to look intimidating, as 2 heavily armed security guards slowly approached the group. "Sir, you need to lower your voice and leave the premises immediately, or we will forcefully remove you for trespassing," the head guard stated firmly. Trey scoffed and stepped closer to the guard, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate the highly trained professional. "I am not going anywhere until the boss of Kiara comes down here and fires her on the spot," Trey threatened, pointing his finger aggressively. "She owes us money and we are here to collect it today. You security guards better step back before I sue this entire building for discrimination." The timing could not have been more perfectly orchestrated. Just as the security guards reached for their radios to call the local police, the polished steel doors of my private VIP elevator chimed and glided open. The soft sound immediately drew the attention of every single person in the massive lobby. I stepped out of the elevator into the bright morning light flooding through the glass atrium. I did not look like the timid, obedient daughter they remembered. I looked like absolute power and wealth personified. I walked slowly across the flawless marble floor, the sharp click of my heels cutting through the sudden silence of the room. The reaction of my employees was instantaneous and completely natural. As I walked past the busy coffee shop and the reception desk, dozens of suited professionals stopped their conversations immediately. They stood up straighter and bowed their heads slightly in deep respect. "Good morning, Madam CEO," a group of senior account executives said in unison. "Good morning, Madam CEO," the reception staff echoed respectfully. I offered them a polite nod, but kept my eyes locked entirely on the 4 intruders, standing frozen in the center of my beautiful lobby. The expressions on the faces of my family members shifted from aggressive arrogance to absolute paralyzing confusion. Vivian dropped her tissue, letting it flutter slowly to the floor. Desmond took a hesitant step backward, his eyes wide with shock. Nia actually lowered her smartphone, forgetting all about her live audience. Trey stood there with his mouth hanging open, unable to process the profound display of wealth and authority unfolding right in front of his eyes. They looked at my expensive suit, they looked at the luxurious surroundings, and they looked at the terrified realization that they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Vivian whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What is going on here? Why are they calling you that? Where is your boss? We came here to speak with your manager about your unacceptable behavior." I stopped walking when I was exactly 5 feet away from them. I signaled my security team to stand down, but remain close. I looked at the people who had tormented me for my entire life, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold corporate detachment. "I am the manager, Vivian," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent lobby. "I am the human resources director. I am the president. I am the chief executive officer. I own this entire public relations agency. I built it from the ground up while you were busy telling everyone I was a failure." Trey let out a nervous and condescending laugh, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "Stop lying, Kiara," he scoffed, looking around the room. "You do not own a multi-million-dollar company. You are just a glorified assistant trying to act tough because your coworkers are watching. Stop playing dress up and transfer the mortgage money to us before things get ugly. We are not leaving until you pay us what you owe us. You need to remember your place in this family." I did not raise my voice. I did not match his aggressive energy. True power never has to shout to be heard. I simply smiled a smile that was completely devoid of any warmth or affection. "Trey," I replied, speaking slowly and deliberately, so every word would land with maximum impact. "I do not just own this prestigious public relations agency. I own this entire commercial building. Every single brick, every pane of glass, and the marble floor you are currently standing on belongs entirely to me. You are standing on my private property making demands with money you do not have." The reality of the situation finally crashed down upon them like a physical blow. The color completely drained from the face of my father Desmond. Nia tried to subtly delete her live broadcast, realizing she had just recorded herself harassing a powerful chief executive officer. Vivian looked around at the pristine lobby, the expensive artwork, the elite security team, and finally back at me. The daughter she had constantly belittled was secretly a highly successful multimillionaire. The realization that she had viciously bitten the only hand capable of feeding her was finally settling into her brain. "But you told us you were just an assistant," Vivian stammered, her confident facade totally destroyed. "Why did you not tell us you were rich, Kiara? We are your family. We could have helped you expand your business. We could have been partners in this venture." "You did not want a partner, Mom," I corrected her sharply. "You wanted a silent automatic teller machine. You wanted someone to blindly fund your fake lifestyle while you treated them like garbage. Well, the machine is broken, and the bank is officially closed for business forever." I turned my attention to the head of my security team, who was watching the exchange with professional detachment. "Escort these 4 individuals out of my building immediately," I ordered loudly. "If they resist, or if they ever set foot on my property again, I want you to have them arrested for criminal trespassing and aggressive harassment. Have the legal department draft a permanent restraining order against all of them by the end of the hour." The security guards immediately moved forward, placing firm hands on the shoulders of Trey and Desmond. "You cannot do this to us," Desmond yelled, struggling against the strong grip of the guard. "We are your parents, Kiara. You owe us everything. You owe us respect. I owe you exactly what you gave me when I arrived at your house after driving through a dangerous blizzard," I replied, turning my back on them. "Absolutely nothing at all." They were forcefully shoved toward the heavy revolving glass doors. The employees in the lobby watched in stunned silence as the fake elite family from Atlanta was thrown out onto the cold Washington, D.C. streets like common criminals. Vivian was crying hysterically, begging the guards to let her speak to me one more time. Nia was screaming about her ruined shoes. Trey was cursing loudly but doing absolutely nothing to physically stop the guards from removing him from the premises. Just before they were pushed completely through the exit doors, Desmond managed to rip his arm away from the guard for one brief second. He turned back toward the lobby, his face twisted with pure, unadulterated hatred and desperation. "You think you have won this battle, Kiara," he screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "You think you can just abandon us and watch us lose our home? You think you are so smart with your fancy building and your expensive suits? But you are wrong. We do not need your pathetic pennies anymore. Darnell is a senior bank manager. He is going to use his elite financial connections to refinance the Buckhead estate tomorrow morning. We are going to pull out hundreds of thousands of dollars in pure equity. We will be richer than you will ever be. We do not need you, and we never did." The heavy glass doors finally pushed them out onto the busy sidewalk, cutting off his frantic screaming. The lobby remained completely silent for a moment before the normal hum of corporate business slowly resumed. My employees quickly went back to their tasks, pretending they had not just witnessed the spectacular personal execution of my entire toxic family. I stood there for a moment, looking through the glass as my family stumbled toward their rented car, shivering in the bitter winter wind. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I simply smirked, crossing my arms over my custom-tailored suit. Desmond truly believed that Darnell was going to be their ultimate financial savior. He genuinely believed that his arrogant son was going to wave a magic banking wand and pull them out of the massive hole they had dug for themselves. But they were incredibly foolish and entirely blind to reality. I knew exactly how deep the financial hole of Darnell really was. I knew secrets about his banking career that would shatter their fragile world completely. They thought they had found a clever loophole to save their fake empire, but they were actually walking straight into a devastating trap. And I was the one holding the key to the cage. I watched the black rental car speed away down the cold Washington Avenue, leaving my family shivering on the sidewalk in absolute shock. They truly believed Darnell was going to step in, wave his banking title around, and magically save them from the massive hole they had dug. They had no idea that Darnell's career was already dangling by a microscopic thread, or that his own reckless financial choices were about to implode. When I returned to my top-floor executive suite, I did not waste a single second celebrating. As a crisis management expert, I knew that when entitled people realize their intimidation tactics have failed, they instinctively resort to public character assassination. They would try to spin the narrative, play the victims, and use public outrage to force my hand. I intended to let them try, because the moment an amateur attempts to wage a public relations war against a seasoned professional, they hand over full control of their own destruction. By 8 o'clock that evening, my predictions unfolded precisely as expected. My assistant sent an urgent notification to my tablet. Nia, who maintained a modest social media following as a mid-tier lifestyle influencer, had gone live on Instagram alongside her husband Trey. I poured myself a glass of red wine, leaned back against my leather chair, and tapped the screen to watch. Nia had set up a dramatically dim lighting arrangement in the Buckhead living room. She had wiped off her glam makeup, wearing an oversized sweater to project an image of vulnerable distress. Trey sat beside her, looking brooding and solemn in a designer hoodie. "Guys, I am literally shaking right now," Nia sobbed into the camera, dabbing her eyes with a crumpled tissue as the view count rapidly climbed. "I never thought I would have to come on here and expose something so painful about my own blood, but our family is in severe danger. My older sister Kiara has completely lost her mind. She got a little corporate position up in DC, and suddenly she thinks she is better than the people who raised her." Trey nodded grimly toward the phone camera, leaning in closer to the microphone. "She promised to help our elderly parents pay off their home," he interjected, putting on a gravely serious tone. "We had a verbal agreement, an explicit family pact." Then out of nowhere, right before the holidays, she greedily pulled her funding out without warning, just to buy herself expensive clothes and power trip. Now the bank is threatening to put two honorable black elders out on the street. Nia let out a dramatic, shuddering gasp, squeezing Trey's hand tightly. We drove all the way to her office to beg her to be reasonable, to remember family values, and she literally had security throw us out into the freezing cold. Nia wailed, holding up her hands. She laughed in our faces. She told us she did not care if our parents ended up homeless. We are terrified, guys. The stress is destroying my mother's health. We created a GoFundMe campaign linked in my bio called Save the Estate. Please, if you believe in supporting Black families and standing against corporate greed, donate whatever you can or share this stream. The comment section immediately began moving at lightning speed. Thousands of her followers started leaving shocked emojis condemning the mysterious, heartless sister who would abandon her aging parents for corporate success. Donations started trickling into the GoFundMe page. $5 here, $20 there from well-meaning strangers who believed the carefully crafted sob story. I watched the screen, my expression completely unbothered. They forgot the fundamental rule of public relations: never launch a smear campaign unless your own backyard is entirely clean. I did not issue a defensive statement. I did not record a tearful response video. I did not even attempt to take down their campaign through legal copyright strikes. Defending yourself online creates a lingering debate. Amplifying their foolishness creates absolute annihilation. I picked up my encrypted mobile device and placed a quick call to an associate who specialized in digital media distribution and algorithm metrics. I have a live broadcast currently gaining traction in the Atlanta metro area, I instructed calmly. I want you to run a targeted algorithmic push on that specific stream. Boost its visibility by 500%. Target the demographics specifically around Atlanta: venture capitalists, auto finance compliance officers, and private credit agencies. Make sure it lands on the primary feed of every luxury debt collection specialist in the state of Georgia. Within 20 minutes, the digital trap sprung shut because I artificially drove massive traffic to Nia's tearful live broadcast. The stream bypassed her usual bubble of impressionable teenage followers and landed directly on the screens of adult professionals across the city. More importantly, it crossed the desks of the precise individuals Trey had been dodging for over 6 months. While Nia was busy dabbing her eyes for the camera, a prominent local tech investor scrolled past the stream and recognized Trey immediately. The investor dropped a comment directly onto the live feed. "Wait, isn't this the same Trey who took $80,000 from our syndicate for his fake Web3 launch and deleted his email address last month?" That single comment acted like a spark in a dry forest. Another account chimed in seconds later. "Hold on, he told us he was living in a luxury condo downtown, but he's sitting in a Buckhead mansion begging for mortgage money. He owes my firm 30 grand for unfulfilled promotional contracts." A third user added, "Look at the driveway behind them. Is that the custom gray Porsche 911? He claimed he bought outright with crypto gains. The repo agency I work for has been actively looking for that exact vehicle VIN number for 90 days. Nia was so focused on reading the initial messages of sympathy that she did not notice the tone of the comment section rapidly shifting. The viewer count surged from 2,000 to over 25,000 people. The chat was no longer filled with heart emojis. It was overflowing with call-outs, fraud allegations, and financial receipts. Trey happened to glance down at the phone screen to check the GoFundMe total, and his face instantly paled. He watched in sheer horror as local business owners began posting his full legal name, his former business aliases, and detailed breakdowns of his failed crypto schemes. Nia, maybe we should end the live stream now." Trey stammered, his confident demeanor vanishing instantly as cold sweat broke out on his forehead. "I think we made our point. Let's just focus on the campaign." "No, wait, guys," Nia said, still trying to keep up her dramatic performance, totally oblivious to the catastrophe unraveling in the chat. "We need to reach $50,000 tonight to cover the back payments." Before she'd finish her sentence, loud red and blue, emergency lights flashed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Buckhead mansion, painting the living room walls in vivid pulses of light. Through the phone mic, the sharp, authoritative wail of a police siren echoed right into the broadcast. Nia froze mid-sentence. The broadcast viewers saw the sheer panic register on both of their faces. Outside in the circular driveway, tires crunched heavily over the gravel. A massive commercial flatbed tow truck pulled up directly behind Trey's shiny prized Porsche, flanked by 2 local law enforcement vehicles, ensuring peace during an asset recovery operation. "What is that noise?" Nia asked, her voice cracking as she stood up from the couch, accidentally leaving the camera running, and pointed straight out the front window toward the illuminated driveway. Trey scrambled toward the front door, flinging it open completely. forgetting that 25,000 people were watching his every move live on the internet. "Hey, what the hell are you doing to my car?" Trey screamed, his voice pitching into a panicked screech as he ran down the brick steps. "You can't touch that. That's my vehicle." A burly repossession officer stepped out of the flatbed truck holding a formal clipboard and a hydraulic winch controller. "Mr. Trey, we have a court-ordered repossession warrant from Premier Auto Finance for 4 consecutive missed lease payments, totaling over $14,000, the officer announced in a loud, clear voice that echoed through the quiet neighborhood and straight into Nia's phone mic. "Step away from the vehicle, sir, or the officers will cite you for obstructing an official recovery." "No, stop," Trey yelled desperately, grabbing the door handle of the sports car. "My mother-in-law is paying the arrears this week. We have an active fundraising campaign." The repo agent did not argue. He backed the truck up, hooked the heavy steel chains around the front axle of the custom Porsche, and engaged the hydraulic lift. The rear tires of the luxury vehicle lifted off the pavement with a loud metallic screech. Nia ran out onto the porch, clutching her silk robe, weeping real tears of utter humiliation as she watched her husband's prized symbol of fake status being hoisted into the air. In the living room, the phone camera continued streaming the entire disaster in high definition. The comments section turned into an absolute frenzy. Screenshots and screen recordings of the repo operation instantly flooded Twitter and TikTok. The viral headline wrote itself: "Influencer begs for house donations on Instagram Live while husband's fake Porsche gets repossessed in the background." I sat in my quiet DC office, took a final sip of my wine, and watched the stream suddenly cut to black as Nia finally realized what was happening and disconnected. Within 2 hours, GoFundMe permanently suspended their fundraising page due to a massive influx of fraud reports filed by Trey's former investors. The small amount of money they had raised was automatically refunded to the donors. They had tried to use public opinion as a weapon to force me into paying their mortgage. Instead, they had accidentally exposed their own fraud, lost their luxury vehicle, destroyed Nia's social media career, and alerted every creditor in the state of Georgia to their exact location. My tablet chimed with an incoming email from my legal team. Attached was a confidential dossier regarding my older brother Darnell. Desmond had bragged that Darnell would use his bank manager status to refinance the Buckhead estate and pull out cash. But according to the internal banking compliance audit my firm had just pulled up, Darnell was in far worse trouble than Trey. Darnell had been illegally altering credit applications to approve his own family's loans. I smiled coldly as I closed the file. They thought the repossession of Trey's car was the worst thing that could happen to them. They had no idea that the real trap was about to spring shut on the entire family. The absolute humiliation of Nia and Trey on Instagram Live was a devastating blow to the fabricated reputation of my family, but it did not stop my parents from trying one last desperate maneuver. With the bank foreclosure deadline rapidly approaching and the viral repossession video destroying any chance of crowdfunding, Vivian and Desmond went into complete panic mode. They could not accept defeat. Instead of facing reality, they doubled down on their delusions. They maxed out their very last available credit cards to rent the grand ballroom at one of the most exclusive country clubs in Buckhead. They hastily organized what they billed as an elite alumni charity gala. They sent out embossed invitations to all their wealthy fraternity brothers, sorority sisters, and high society friends. Their secret objective was incredibly sinister. They planned to pitch a completely fake business venture during the dinner to trick their affluent guests into investing massive sums of money. They intended to use those investments to secretly pay off the massive mortgage arrears and save their mansion. They assumed I would be too busy or too disinterested to attend an alumni event for a university I did not even attend. They completely forgot that in the elite circles of Atlanta wealth and influence overlap perfectly with my corporate public relations network. I received an invitation from a prominent venture capitalist who happened to be one of my top-tier clients. He asked me to accompany him as his strategic advisor because he was suspicious of the sudden business pitch from my father. I gladly accepted. I arrived at the country club looking absolutely breathtaking. I wore a custom-tailored emerald green evening gown that commanded immediate attention. I walked into the grand ballroom, projecting an aura of untouchable power and absolute confidence. The room was filled with the exact demographic my parents were desperately trying to exploit. Wealthy doctors, successful lawyers, and seasoned investors were mingling under the crystal chandeliers, sipping premium champagne. My parents were standing near the main stage, schmoozing a group of potential victims. Vivian spotted me the moment I walked through the double doors. The fake smile instantly dropped from her face. She quickly recovered and decided to play the ultimate victim card. She grabbed the arm of a wealthy surgeon and pointed toward me with a dramatic sigh. "Look at my prodigal daughter," Vivian announced loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "We sacrificed everything for her, and she completely turned her back on her family during our darkest hour. She is so lost, but I pray for her soul every single day." She tried to frame my presence as a pathetic attempt to crawl back into their good graces. She wanted the room to view me as a rebellious, ungrateful child begging for a second chance. I did not make a scene. I did not raise my voice or argue with her public manipulation. I simply smiled gracefully and began to mingle with the crowd. Vivian and Desmond did not realize that the most powerful investors in that ballroom were not their friends. They were my deeply loyal clients. The men and women they were trying to scam relied entirely on my public relations agency to manage their corporate reputations and protect their massive wealth. I walked over to the main investor table where my father was currently sweating through his expensive tuxedo. Desmond was aggressively pitching a fictional commercial real estate fund, claiming it would yield a 30% return in 6 months. The investors were listening politely, holding their checkbooks in their hands, preparing to write massive checks based purely on the historical prestige of my father. I gracefully joined the circle, holding a glass of sparkling water. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said smoothly. The investors immediately turned and their faces lit up with genuine respect. Kiara, my dear, one of the billionaire hedge fund managers, smiled warmly, kissing my cheek. "We were just listening to this fascinating pitch from Desmond. What are your professional thoughts on this real estate venture?" Desmond stared at me with pure terror in his eyes. He knew I held the power to destroy his entire scheme with a single sentence. I took a slow sip of my water and looked directly at my sweating father. "It sounds incredibly ambitious," I replied, my voice perfectly measured and dripping with professional authority. "However, as your risk management advisor, I must highly recommend executing a rigorous background check on the personal financial stability of the managing partners. I have seen many enthusiastic entrepreneurs try to launch massive real estate funds while secretly hiding their own residential foreclosure notices. A managing partner who cannot even pay their own monthly mortgage is certainly not someone you want handling your investment portfolios." The silence that fell over the investor circle was deafening. The wealthy men looked at me, then looked back at my father. The subtle yet razor-sharp implication was immediately understood by everyone in the circle. They were seasoned businessmen who knew how to read between the lines. They recognized a major financial red flag when it was handed directly to them by the best crisis manager in the country. Without saying another word, the billionaire hedge fund manager slowly clicked his pen shut and slid his leather checkbook back into his tailored suit jacket. The other investors followed his lead instantly, withdrawing their financial support. "Well, Desmond," the hedge fund manager said coldly, "we will have our legal teams review your proposal and get back to you next quarter. Thank you for the lovely evening." The investors walked away, leaving my father standing there looking completely broken. His grand master plan to scam his friends out of hundreds of thousands of dollars had just evaporated into thin air. I spent the next hour casually circling the ballroom, dropping subtle whispered truths into the ears of every major investor. I did not have to yell or cause a dramatic scene. I simply planted the necessary seeds of extreme doubt. By the time the charity dinner was officially served, not a single person in that country club was willing to write a check to my parents. Vivian was hyperventilating near the bar, realizing their desperate cash grab was a total failure. I was preparing to leave the gala, feeling incredibly satisfied with the silent destruction I had just orchestrated. As I walked down the dimly lit carpeted hallway toward the valet stand, a heavy hand suddenly grabbed my arm and violently yanked me into a dark alcove. It was my older brother, Darnell. His eyes were wild and his breath smelled heavily of cheap liquor. You just could not let them win, could you? Darnell hissed aggressively, backing me against the wall. You just ruined their very last chance to save the estate. You chased away every single investor in that ballroom. I easily brushed his hand off my expensive silk sleeve, smoothing the fabric. They were trying to commit investment fraud, Darnell, I stated coldly. I simply protected my clients from making a terrible financial mistake. You should be thanking me for keeping your parents out of federal prison tonight. Darnell let out a dark, bitter laugh, leaning closer to my face. You think you are so brilliant, Kiara, he sneered, a sinister smile spreading across his face. You think you hold all the cards because you stopped paying the mortgage and ruined this gala. But guess what? I found a massive legal loophole. I secured an all-cash buyer for the Buckhead house through a private corporate limited liability company. I personally fast-tracked the paperwork through my bank this morning. We are pushing through an expedited short sale. Mom and Dad are going to walk away with $800,000 in pure liquid equity. We are closing the deal tomorrow afternoon. You thought you could destroy us, but we are about to be richer than ever, and you will never see a single dime of the money you put into that property. I walked away and left the country club feeling extremely victorious tonight. My foolish family was busy celebrating a massive payday that they would never ever receive. Darnell genuinely thought his banking skills had successfully secured their total financial freedom. He truly thought he had easily outplayed me. But the private limited liability company he had rushed to approve for the cash sale was entirely owned and operated by me. The truth was going to hit them all with the devastating force of a freight train tomorrow afternoon. Darnell was absolutely clueless about the massive trap I had meticulously built for them behind the scenes. He proudly watched me leave the dark hallway, completely unaware that he had just handed me the final weapon I needed to completely destroy their fake empire. I stepped outside into the cool night air, took a deep breath, and smiled brightly. Checkmate, I finally whispered very quietly to the darkness. Darnell strutted into his bank branch the morning after the charity gala feeling like an absolute genius. He was completely convinced that he had just outsmarted everyone, including me. His financial situation was actually much worse than my parents realized. Darnell owed a massive amount of money to some very dangerous private lenders. His luxurious lifestyle with Jada was entirely funded by fraudulent personal loans. When he realized my parents were facing imminent foreclosure, he did not see a family tragedy. He saw a highly lucrative opportunity to save himself. Darnell used his administrative credentials to bypass standard banking protocols. He manually suppressed the foreclosure alerts on the Buckhead estate and pushed through an expedited short sale. The buyer was a mysterious entity listed on the paperwork as Apex Holdings LLC. The company had offered $1.2 million in pure cash, with an incredibly fast closing date. Darnell did not bother to run a thorough background check on the buyer. He saw the massive cash offer and let his blinding greed take over completely. He calculated that after paying off the primary mortgage of $400,000, our parents would walk away with major liquid financial equity. They would secure exactly $800,000. Darnell had already convinced Desmond and Vivian to give him a $200,000 cut of the profits as a reward for saving their precious social standing. He manipulated the banking software to fast-track the approval process, committing multiple federal offenses in a single afternoon, just to ensure the deal closed before the end of the week. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, my family was busy celebrating their imaginary victory. Vivian and Desmond were practically giddy with sheer excitement. They genuinely believed they had successfully defeated me once and for all. They thought they had found the ultimate loophole to keep their stolen wealth and leave me with absolutely nothing. Their arrogance reached an all-time high. I was sitting in my Washington office reviewing a new crisis management proposal when my phone suddenly buzzed. I looked down at the screen. The family group chat, which I had previously abandoned, had been reactivated. They specifically unblocked my number just to drag me back into their toxic digital circle for one final gloating session. My screen lit up with a high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of the official real estate purchase agreement. The document clearly showed the massive $1.2 million sale price and the expedited closing date set for later that week. Vivian sent the first message. Her text was dripping with condescending venom. "Look at this, Kiara," she typed. "Darnell just saved the family estate. He found a cash buyer who loves the house. We are closing in a few days. We are about to be richer than ever. You thought you could destroy us by cutting off your little monthly payments," she wrote. "You thought we would end up on the freezing street. But we are walking away with hundreds of thousands of dollars in pure cash. Enjoy dying alone in your cold, empty apartment, Kiara. You are officially cut out of our legacy forever." I read their spiteful messages and let out a soft, genuine laugh. Their absolute delusion was almost fascinating to witness. I did not type a response. I did not block them again. I simply left the message marked as read, so they knew I had seen their pathetic attempt at intimidation. I wanted them to feel victorious. I wanted them to celebrate. I wanted them to confidently climb to the very highest peak of their arrogant mountain, because the subsequent fall was going to be absolutely devastating. The perspective shifted perfectly to my current reality. I was sitting comfortably in my massive corner office, bathed in warm afternoon sunlight. Across the glass desk sat my personal attorney, Elias. Elias was a ruthless, brilliant real estate lawyer who handled all my private acquisitions. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit and nursing a double espresso. He watched me set my phone down with a highly amused expression. "I assume the family is currently celebrating," Elias asked, his voice deep and smooth. "They are practically popping the champagne," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Darnell just sent me a picture of the purchase agreement. They are convinced they are walking away with $800,000 in equity. They think they have completely outsmarted me." Elias chuckled darkly and reached into his sleek leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it squarely in the middle of my desk. He opened the file to reveal the official incorporation documents for the buyer listed on their fraudulent contract. The paperwork clearly showed that Apex Holdings LLC was a private entity registered in Delaware. It also clearly listed me as the sole owner and chief executive officer of the holding company. Darnell was so desperate to secure his illegal commission that he failed to conduct even a basic corporate background check, Elias stated, tapping the document with his expensive pen. He saw the cash offer and pushed it through the banking system blindly. "He has effectively orchestrated the sale of his parents' home directly to you while committing severe bank fraud in the process." I took a slow sip of my espresso. Darnell always thought he was the smartest person in any room, I noted. His arrogance blinded him to the most basic due diligence. But the real masterpiece is not just the purchase agreement. Elias smiled a sharp, predatory smile. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out another document. This one was slightly yellowed at the edges. It was a formal legal contract dated exactly 4 years ago. It contained the notarized signatures of both Vivian and Desmond. Elias slid the document across the glass desk so I could look at it. "Do they truly not realize that you are the primary lion holder on that estate?" Elias asked, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "When you stepped in to save them from foreclosure 4 years ago, you did not just hand them cash. You had them sign a legally binding promissory note secured by a properly recorded property lien against the actual deed of the house." I picked up the document and traced my finger over the signatures of my parents. "They signed it without reading a single word," I explained coldly. "I told them it was just standard banking paperwork required to process the mortgage payments from my corporate account." They were so desperate to keep their fake high society status that they scribbled their names on the dotted line without consulting a lawyer. They handed me complete legal control over their financial future, and they never even realized it. Elias pointed to the precise mathematical breakdown attached to the lien. "They think they are walking away with $800,000 in equity," he said, his voice filled with professional satisfaction. "But they fundamentally misunderstand how a short sale legally operates. The bank will take the first $400,000 to clear the primary mortgage debt. But the remaining equity does not go to the seller. It goes directly to the next secured creditor on the title." I looked out the window at the sprawling city below, And that secured creditor is me, I stated. Exactly, Elias confirmed. Your line covers 48 months of mortgage payments, plus compounding interest, plus the initial lump sum you paid to stop the first foreclosure plus legal fees. The total debt they legally owe you is exactly $800,000. When the closing attorney distributes the funds from the sale, every single penny of that remaining equity will be legally transferred directly back into your corporate accounts. I looked at the phone sitting on my desk. The screen lit up with another message from Nia, bragging about the luxury penthouse she and Trey were planning to rent using the money they expected to receive from the sale. They were making massive financial commitments based entirely on a ghost fortune. They were borrowing money from dangerous loan sharks to fund a lifestyle they could not afford, banking everything on a payout that simply did not exist. Let them pop the champagne for now. I smiled coldly, handing the document back to Elias. Let them book their luxury vacations and sign their new leases. Let them confidently believe they have completely destroyed me. The closing date is scheduled for this Friday afternoon. We will let them walk right into the boardroom, feeling like absolute royalty, and then we will drop the heavy anvil. Elias closed the manila folder and packed it securely back into his sleek briefcase. He stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. It is going to be an absolute bloodbath in that closing room, he noted, his eyes shining. I stood up. It is the natural consequence of crossing a crisis manager. Checkmate. While Elias and I prepared the final elements of our trap in Washington, Darnell was back in Atlanta acting like the undisputed king of his local bank branch. He strutted through the glass doors that Wednesday morning, wearing a new designer suit he had purchased on credit. He was radiating the kind of toxic arrogance that only comes from unearned confidence. He genuinely believed his short sale scheme was completely foolproof. In his mind, he was days away from a massive payout that would wipe away his private debts and elevate him to the highest social circles of Buckhead. He treated his subordinates appallingly that morning. He barked orders at the junior loan officers, demanding they push his personal files to the top of the processing queue. When a diligent compliance clerk gently pointed out that the Apex Holdings paperwork lacked proper background verification, Darnell verbally berated her in the middle of the open floor. He loudly threatened her job security, claiming his elite status within the company granted him the authority to bypass standard protocols. He manually authorized the final stages of the short sale, overriding the system warnings with his managerial credentials. He left a glaring trail of digital fingerprints across multiple federal banking regulations, but he was too blinded by his own greed to care. He simply wanted the commission and the glory. He had absolutely no idea that a massive storm was already brewing at the highest levels of his corporate hierarchy. Darnell was just a mid-level manager at a single branch, but his bank belonged to a massive regional financial institution. For the past 3 weeks, that parent institution had been battling a severe public relations nightmare involving allegations of internal corruption and loose lending practices. The regional board of directors was terrified of federal regulators stepping in to audit their entire operation. They desperately needed an external powerhouse to come in, clean up their corporate image, and restructure their internal compliance optics before the media caught wind of the full story. They needed the best crisis management agency in the United States. They hired my firm. My contract with the bank had been signed weeks before my family ever showed up at my Thanksgiving door. It was a beautiful piece of cosmic justice. The board of directors scheduled a mandatory emergency executive audit for that exact Wednesday afternoon. Every branch manager in the greater Atlanta region was required to attend in person at the downtown corporate headquarters. Darnell arrived at the meeting feeling completely untouchable. He took a seat near the back of the plush executive boardroom, checking his expensive watch and texting Jada about their upcoming vacation plans. He paid no attention to the serious faces of the regional vice presidents sitting at the front of the long mahogany table. He assumed this was just another boring corporate lecture about standard compliance updates. The regional vice president stood up and cleared his throat, demanding absolute silence in the massive room. He explained the severe nature of the ongoing crisis and stressed the immediate need for total operational transparency. I then announced that they had retained an elite Washington-based firm to identify their critical vulnerabilities and overhaul their internal protocols. He gestured toward the heavy oak doors at the side of the room. Please welcome the Chief Executive Officer of our new crisis management partnership, he announced respectfully. I walked into the boardroom wearing a pristine white tailored suit, projecting absolute authority. My presence immediately commanded the respect of every senior executive in the room. I walked straight to the podium at the front of the room, plugging my encrypted tablet into the main presentation system. I did not immediately look at Darnell. I let the tension build naturally, while the massive digital projector screen flickered to life behind me. I began my presentation by outlining the severe reputational damage caused by careless mid-level management. I spoke eloquently about the severe legal consequences of bypassing automated security protocols. The senior executives nodded along in enthusiastic agreement, taking frantic notes. Then I clicked the presentation remote to the next slide. Let us examine a hypothetical but highly active case study of internal vulnerability. I announced, my voice echoing crisply across the silent boardroom. I brought up a detailed flowchart on the massive screen. It showed the exact trajectory of a fraudulent short sale transaction. I had meticulously redacted the specific names of the buyers and sellers to comply with privacy laws, but I left the employee identification numbers and branch codes completely visible. This particular transaction was processed just this morning, I explained, pacing slowly across the front of the room. A branch manager utilized his senior credentials to manually override 4 separate security warnings. He approved a massive cash sale to a private shell company without conducting any mandatory beneficial ownership background checks. He suppressed foreclosure notifications and expedited the transfer of a highly contested residential property. I finally locked eyes with Darnell. He was sitting frozen in his leather chair. All the arrogant color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He recognized his own employee identification number glaring in bright red letters on the massive projection screen. He recognized the exact timeline of the Buckhead estate transaction he had illegally authorized just hours earlier. He realized in that agonizing moment that the elite crisis manager exposing his federal crimes to the entire regional board of directors was the exact same sister he had threatened to destroy on social media just a few days prior. Furthermore, I continued holding his terrified gaze. I discovered during my preliminary audit that this specific manager stands to gain a massive undisclosed financial kickback from this unverified transaction. This is not just a simple procedural error, gentlemen. This is a textbook example of severe bank fraud occurring right under your noses. It is a massive liability that could expose this entire institution to federal prosecution if not handled immediately. The regional vice president looked horrified. He immediately recognized the branch code displayed on the screen. He turned his furious gaze directly toward the back of the room, where Darnell was sitting paralyzed with sheer panic. Darnell opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at the furious executives, and then he looked back at me. I offered him a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk. He had tried to use his banking career to intimidate me, and now I was using my corporate empire to completely dismantle his life. The regional vice president stood up abruptly, slamming his hand onto the table. Darnell, he barked, his voice shaking with anger. You will surrender your security badge and your corporate laptop right now. You are suspended immediately pending a full internal and federal investigation. Security will escort you out of this building. The entire boardroom watched in stunned silence as 2 armed corporate security guards marched into the room and grabbed Darnell by his arms. He did not fight back. He was too deep in a state of absolute shock to even protest. He had walked into that building feeling like a wealthy, untouchable king, and he was being dragged out as an unemployed criminal suspect, facing decades in federal prison. I smoothly transitioned to the next slide of my presentation without missing a single beat. I continued my lecture on corporate restructuring while the pathetic whimpering of my older brother faded down the hallway. It was a flawless execution of professional dominance. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the back of my chauffeured vehicle, heading toward my luxury hotel suite. My private phone began to ring incessantly. It was an unknown Atlanta number, but I knew exactly who was calling. I answered the call and pressed the phone to my ear without saying a word. Jada was screaming hysterically on the other end of the line. Her voice was shrill and cracking with absolute panic. "Kiara, what did you do?" she shrieked, crying uncontrollably. "Darnell just came home with his belongings in a box. The bank froze all his accounts. They seized his company car. He says he is facing federal prison time. We have no money, Kiara. We have nothing left. We cannot pay our own rent this month. How could you do this to your own family?" I listened to her frantic sobbing with complete emotional detachment. This was the woman who threatened to get me fired just a few days ago. She had gleefully tried to put me on the street. Now the harsh reality of her actions was crushing her. "You and Darnell played a stupid game, Jada." I replied, my voice flat. "You tried to commit fraud and you got caught by the auditor. That is not my fault." I ended the call and blocked her number. Darnell was financially ruined. The first pillar of their toxic empire had collapsed. Now it was time to handle the rest of them. With Darnell suspended and facing severe federal charges, the atmosphere inside the massive Buckhead mansion shifted rapidly from arrogant celebration to absolute paralyzing terror. Vivian and Desmond had placed their entire financial future securely on the shoulders of their oldest son. Now he was completely unemployed, disgraced, and entirely unable to shield them from the looming wrath of the aggressive bank. The clock was no longer just ticking loudly, it was practically screaming. The absolute deadline for the bank to finalize the foreclosure and physically lock them out of the sprawling estate was only 3 short days away. My parents were completely cornered. Without Darnell navigating the banking system from the inside, they had no buffer between their fake luxurious life and the cold hard street. In a state of sheer panic, Desmond began frantically calling the corporate contact number listed on the Apex Holdings purchase agreement. I had absolutely no idea that the phone number routed directly to the pristine desk of my ruthless attorney Elias in Washington, D.C. Elias played his crucial role with Oscar-winning perfection. He answered their desperate phone calls with a calm, professional demeanor that only heightened their frantic anxiety. Desmond practically begged Elias to finalize the short sale paperwork immediately. He lied effortlessly, claiming they needed to close the deal early because they were preparing to leave for an extended European vacation. Elias listened to their pathetic fabrications and graciously agreed to expedite the closing process, setting the final date for Friday afternoon. My parents felt an immense wave of profound relief, thinking they had successfully secured their massive payout just before the strict foreclosure deadline struck. While Vivian and Desmond were busy negotiating their own rapid demise, my younger sister Nia and her arrogant husband Trey were making their own catastrophic choices. The viral repossession of the custom Porsche had completely destroyed the influencer career of Nia. Prominent brands were aggressively dropping her lucrative sponsorship deals overnight. Trey was hiding indoors, terrified that his angry crypto investors would show up at the mansion demanding their stolen money. They desperately needed to escape the city and start fresh, but their personal bank accounts were entirely empty. Instead of facing reality, they leaned heavily into their grand delusions. Vivian had repeatedly promised Nia a massive $200,000 cut of the impending short sale equity. My mother wanted to ensure her golden child could easily maintain the fragile facade of Black excellence regardless of the current public relations disaster, banking entirely on this promised windfall. Trey made the most reckless financial decision of his entire miserable life. He reached out to a notorious local loan shark he had met during his shady cryptocurrency days. Trey borrowed $50,000 in pure cash at an exorbitant astronomical interest rate. He used the extremely dangerous borrowed money to secure a security deposit and 6 months of advance rent on a sprawling luxury penthouse in downtown Atlanta. Nia immediately started posting vague aesthetic photos of the stunning skyline view from the empty apartment, teasing a massive upcoming life update to her remaining loyal followers. They were eagerly spending imaginary money that legally belonged solely to me. They were digging a grave so incredibly deep they would never be able to climb out. They truly believed that Friday afternoon would bring them total financial salvation. On Thursday evening, exactly 24 hours before the scheduled closing, I was standing in my spacious corner office watching the gorgeous sunset paint the Washington skyline in brilliant shades of orange and deep purple. My polished desk phone buzzed loudly. It was Desmond. He was calling me directly from his personal cell phone. I tapped the speaker button and leaned comfortably against the cold glass window. He did not call to apologize for the gross disrespect I experienced at Thanksgiving. He did not call to ask if I was doing well or succeeding in my career. He called to deliver one final malicious taunt before he genuinely thought I was erased from their affluent lives forever. Well, Kiara Desmond began, his deep voice dripping with intense condescending arrogance. I just wanted to call and let you know that you completely failed. You tried to destroy this proud family by cutting off your little monthly payments, but your pathetic plan simply did not work. We found a wealthy corporate buyer for the grand estate. We are officially closing the lucrative deal tomorrow afternoon. We are walking away with $800,000 in pure liquid equity. We are moving up in the world rapidly, and we are doing it without your help. I listened to his boastful speech with complete, absolute silence. He was so incredibly proud of himself. He genuinely thought he had secured a massive permanent victory against his own independent daughter. Your mother and I are buying a beautiful new estate. Desmond continued, his tone growing even more cruel and vindictive. Naya and Trey already secured a gorgeous downtown penthouse apartment. Darnell has hit a small temporary bump in his career, but we are going to use some of this cash to hire the absolute best defense attorneys in the state. We are going straight to the very top. I wanted to call you today just so you know that you are officially cut out of our grand legacy forever. We do not need your money anymore. We do not need your presence in our home. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely woman, and you will never be welcome at our grand dinner table again. I looked out my floor-to-ceiling window, watching the glowing city lights begin to flicker on in the growing darkness. My heart beat with a steady, powerful, calm rhythm. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness, rejection, or pain. I only felt the thrilling, intense anticipation of the impending execution. I let a few seconds of heavy, dense silence stretch over the phone line, ensuring I had his complete, undivided attention. I took a slow, calming breath and responded with a voice so chillingly calm it could have easily frozen boiling water. "Congratulations, Dad," I said softly, keeping my tone perfectly measured and impeccably polite. "I am truly fascinated by your upcoming real estate transaction. It sounds like a highly lucrative deal for the buyer." Desmond scoffed loudly, clearly irritated by my total lack of emotional distress. "You can act like you do not care, Kiara, but we both know you are absolutely seething with jealousy right now," he bragged loudly. "We won the game and you lost everything. Accept your miserable defeat and stay out of our successful business." I smiled, a sharp, predatory smile that he could not possibly see over the digital phone line. "I am looking forward to it," I replied smoothly. "I will see you tomorrow at the closing table." I reached over and firmly pressed the glowing red button to end the call before he could formulate another arrogant response. Back in Atlanta, Desmond stared at his dark phone screen in complete, utter confusion. He muttered a few harsh, dismissive words, brushing my final statement off as a desperate, pathetic bluff. He assumed I was just trying to ruin his victorious mood with empty, baseless threats. He poured himself a tall glass of expensive imported bourbon and happily toasted to his own imaginary brilliance. He truly believed he had thoroughly defeated the crisis manager. He had absolutely no idea that the corporate executioner was already packing her sleek leather briefcase for a morning flight. The massive trap was fully set, and the foolish prey was walking willingly toward it. The final countdown had officially begun, and the high stakes could not possibly be any higher. While Desmond drank his premium bourbon, Vivian was frantically packing her luxury designer clothing into expensive matching luggage sets. She was eagerly preparing for her imaginary triumphant relocation to a brand new affluent neighborhood. She was already practicing the incredibly boastful speeches she would deliver to her judgmental friends at the exclusive country club. She planned to tell everyone that selling the Buckhead estate was a brilliant strategic investment move and that her family was entering a new era of unprecedented prosperity. They were all so profoundly intoxicated by their own fabricated lies that they completely ignored the dark storm clouds gathering directly above their heads. They danced joyfully on the unstable edge of a massive, devastating cliff. Tomorrow afternoon, they would dress in their absolute best formal attire and march confidently into a prestigious legal boardroom, expecting to be handed a life-changing fortune. They expected to receive a massive check that would permanently solve all their problems. They expected to walk out as wealthy, victorious conquerors. They were expecting a beautiful miracle, but I was bringing a massacre. It was going to be extremely fun to watch them slowly realize that their entire fraudulent scheme was successfully weaponized against them by me. The game was finally over. Friday afternoon arrived with a crisp winter chill, but the atmosphere inside the prestigious Atlanta real estate law firm was suffocatingly warm and loud. My family treated the elegant mahogany waiting area like their own personal VIP lounge at a busy nightclub. They arrived together in a convoy of expensive rental cars, determined to project an image of undeniable wealth. Vivian wore a bright red designer dress that was entirely inappropriate for a serious legal closing. Desmond sported a custom tuxedo jacket, acting as if he was attending an exclusive gala rather than signing away his foreclosed property. Nia and Trey marched in wearing matching designer sunglasses indoors, loudly discussing the interior decoration plans for their newly leased luxury penthouse. Even Darnell and Jada showed up, projecting fake confidence. Darnell was desperately trying to hide the fact that he was currently under federal investigation and suspended from his job. He adjusted his silk tie and puffed out his chest, pretending he was still a powerful bank manager who had masterfully orchestrated this entire lucrative transaction. The receptionist at the front desk typed furiously on her keyboard, clearly annoyed by their booming voices and complete lack of basic professional etiquette. They laughed loudly and clinked complimentary bottles of sparkling water, treating the serious legal office like a cheap celebration venue. They were practically buzzing with toxic excitement, completely blinded by the massive payday they believed was only minutes away. A junior paralegal eventually escorted them into the primary executive boardroom. The room was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Buckhead skyline and a massive polished oak conference table. My family eagerly took their seats on one side of the table, spreading out like conquering royalty. Desmond sat at the center, leaning back in the plush leather chair with his hands folded behind his head. Vivian immediately started complaining about the temperature in the room, demanding that the paralegal adjust the thermostat to accommodate her specific preferences. Trey pulled out his phone and started recording a video for his remaining social media followers, bragging about closing $1 million real estate deal. Nia leaned into the frame, fixing her hair and blowing a dramatic kiss to the camera lens. They were already spending the $800,000 in their greedy minds. Jada leaned over and whispered to Darnell, asking how soon the wire transfer would hit their accounts. Darnell assured her confidently that the funds would clear before the banking day ended. He promised her they would go luxury car shopping the very next morning. They sat in that beautiful room, wrapped in a thick blanket of pure delusion. They had absolutely no idea that every single word they spoke, and every arrogant laugh that echoed off the glass walls was serving as the perfect prelude to their ultimate destruction. The closing attorney walked into the boardroom carrying a thick stack of legal files. Mr. Sterling was a seasoned professional with decades of experience handling high-stakes commercial and residential real estate transactions. He wore a sharp gray suit and possessed a calm, analytical demeanor. He took his seat at the head of the long table, carefully arranging his documents without offering them a warm smile. He knew exactly what was about to happen. My legal team had briefed him extensively on the complex mechanics of this particular short sale and the underlying property lien. He looked at my loud, obnoxious family with a mixture of professional detachment and quiet pity. Vivian immediately tapped her manicured fingernails impatiently against the polished wood table. "Let us get this over with quickly, Mr. Sterling," she demanded with a haughty tone. Where exactly is the representative for Apex Holdings? We have a luxury cruise to the Bahamas to book this afternoon, and I do not want to miss the priority booking window. Desmond chuckled in agreement, checking his gold watch. Time is money, Vivian, he stated proudly, looking at the attorney. We are ready to sign the final paperwork and collect our equity check. Please bring the buyer in so we can finalize this transaction today. Mr. Sterling simply adjusted his reading glasses and looked at his watch. The buyer will be here momentarily, he replied, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. I highly suggest you review the settlement statement while we patiently wait. Vivian waved her hand dismissively, ignoring the thick stack of financial documents pushed toward her. We do not need to read the fine print, she scoffed confidently. My son Darnell is a senior banking executive. He already reviewed and approved all the financial parameters of this cash sale. Just show us where to sign so we can collect our $800,000. Darnell puffed out his chest, attempting to look authoritative, despite the cold sweat forming on the back of his neck. Before Mr. Sterling could respond, the heavy oak double doors of the executive boardroom swung open with a resounding thud. The loud, arrogant laughter of my family died instantly, catching in their throats like dry sand. I walked into the room projecting the kind of lethal power that instantly suffocates the air out of a space. I wore a tailored black power suit with razor-sharp shoulders and stiletto heels that clicked ominously against the hardwood floor. I was flanked by Elias on my right and two other sharp-suited corporate litigators on my left. We moved together as a unified, impenetrable wall of legal and financial destruction. The sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room was palpable. The smug smiles melted off the faces of Vivian and Desmond. Nia dropped her phone onto the table with a loud clatter. Trey physically recoiled in his leather chair. Darnell stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute sheer terror, because he was the only one in the room who truly understood the banking implications of my unexpected presence. I did not say a single word as I slowly approached the opposite side of the massive conference table. I simply stood there looking down at the terrible people who had repeatedly treated me like a disposable financial asset for my entire life. I watched the frantic panic turning in their heads as they desperately tried to rationalize why the daughter they had violently discarded was currently standing in a highly secure corporate law firm flanked by a team of elite attorneys. Desmond was the first one to finally break the heavy, agonizing silence hanging over the room. He stood up abruptly, his face flushing with a dark, angry red color. "What the hell are you doing here, Kiara?" he bellowed, pointing an aggressive finger directly across the table. "How did you even know about this private location? Get out of here right now." He turned his furious gaze toward Mr. Sterling. "Security!" he demanded loudly, his voice shaking with intense rage. "Call your building security right now and get her out of this private meeting. She has absolutely nothing to do with this real estate transaction." Vivian chimed in, standing up next to him, her pearl necklace shaking against her chest. "You are so incredibly pathetic, Kiara," she hissed venomously, her eyes narrowing in pure disgust. "You could not stand the absolute fact that we found a brilliant way to win without your money, so you maliciously followed us here to ruin our celebration. You are just a bitter, jealous little girl who cannot handle our impending success." Mr. Sterling did not reach for the office phone to call the security team. He did not look intimidated by the loud, aggressive shouting of my father. He simply let out a long, tired sigh and adjusted his glasses once again. He looked directly at my furious parents, with an expression of profound, undeniable pity. "Mr. Desmond, please sit down and lower your voice immediately," Mr. Sterling instructed calmly, folding his hands over the legal files. "Allow me to formally introduce the sole owner and Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings LLC, your daughter Kiara. The words hung in the chilling air of the boardroom, like a heavy execution block slowly dropping from the sky. Desmond opened his mouth to scream another vicious insult, but his voice completely failed him. He collapsed backward into his leather chair, his legs giving out beneath him as the crushing weight of the revelation finally registered in his brain. Vivian grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, her perfectly manicured nails scraping against the polished wood as she desperately tried to steady her trembling body. Nia let out a small, pathetic gasp, burying her face in her hands. Trey looked back and forth between me and the closing attorney, silently praying that this was all just an elaborate, cruel joke. Jada covered her mouth with trembling fingers, realizing their promised wealth was a total illusion. Darnell simply closed his eyes and lowered his head, accepting his absolute doom. The trap had successfully snapped completely shut forever. Section 10, exactly 1500 words. The absolute dead silence inside the executive boardroom was so profoundly heavy that it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the chest of every single person present. I walked slowly and deliberately past my frozen family members, making my way directly to the grand head of the polished oak conference table. I pulled back the heavy leather chair and gracefully took my seat, claiming my rightful position of absolute authority. Elias stood tall and imposing on my right side, while my two other corporate litigators took their respective positions on my left, forming an impenetrable fortress of legal power around me. I looked down the length of the massive table, studying the horrified faces of the people who had tormented me for my entire life. Vivian was completely paralyzed, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently against the dark wood. Desmond looked as though he was rapidly struggling to draw oxygen into his failing lungs. Darnell was actively sweating through his expensive silk collar, knowing that his banking career was already dead and buried. Nia and Trey sat frozen in sheer terror, realizing their luxury penthouse dreams were rapidly evaporating into thin air. Jada simply stared at the floor, completely defeated. I reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of formal legal documents. I placed the massive stack firmly onto the smooth glass surface of the table. The sharp slapping sound of the heavy paper hitting the hard table echoed like a gunshot through the perfectly silent room, making my mother physically flinch in her chair. I slowly slid the intimidating stack of documents directly toward my parents. "You wanted to know why I am sitting in this private meeting?" I asked, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the tense, quiet space. "You demanded to know the identity of the mysterious, wealthy corporate buyer who graciously offered to purchase your foreclosed estate with pure liquid cash." I smiled, a sharp, cold smile that completely lacked any warmth. "I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, LLC. I am the cash buyer. I'm the one who orchestrated this entire expedited real estate transaction. You thought you could simply bypass me. You truly believed you could outsmart the banking system and walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund your lavish fake lifestyle. You confidently bragged that you were entirely cutting me out of your grand family legacy forever. But you fundamentally failed to realize that I am the only reason you even have a legacy left to sell." Desmond tried to open his mouth to formulate some sort of aggressive defense, but his vocal cords completely failed him. His natural arrogance had been thoroughly stripped away, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, weak old man who had finally been cornered by his own malicious greed. Vivian looked at the thick stack of legal documents sitting directly in front of her, but she was entirely too frightened to touch them. She knew deep down in her dark soul that whatever those papers contained would absolutely destroy her. "You see, Mom," I continued, keeping my tone perfectly measured and impeccably polite, "I do not just manage public relations crises for elite billionaires. I also know exactly how to manage toxic financial liabilities. And you are the biggest financial liability I have ever encountered." I turned my head slightly and nodded toward my attorney. "Elias, the floor is yours." Elias confidently stepped forward, buttoning his custom-tailored suit jacket. He projected the ruthless, calculating energy of a seasoned legal predator who was about to thoroughly enjoy devouring his trapped prey. He looked directly at my trembling parents with absolute professional disdain. "4 years ago," Elias began, his deep, authoritative voice commanding the entire room, "when you aggressively demanded that Kiara pay your massive $4,500 monthly mortgage, you made a catastrophic legal miscalculation. You simply assumed she was just giving you free money out of some misplaced sense of foolish filial duty. You thought you could treat her like a silent, endless automated teller machine. But my client does not just give her hard-earned wealth away to ungrateful people. She makes highly secure strategic investments. Elias reached across the table and tapped a long, elegant finger directly on the top document of the stack. When Kiara stepped in to save your estate from the first foreclosure, she had you sign a very specific set of financial documents. You thought it was just standard banking paperwork required to authorize the monthly wire transfers from her corporate accounts. But you were so incredibly desperate to keep your fake high society status that you signed those documents blindly. You never bothered to read the fine print. You never hired a lawyer to review the binding contracts. You just scribbled your signatures on the dotted line because you only cared about keeping your precious mansion. Elias paused, letting the devastating reality of his words sink deep into their panicked minds. That document you signed blindly was a legally binding promissory note, he stated sharply, and it was secured by a legally recorded property lien against the actual physical deed of your house. The realization hit Desmond like a runaway freight train. He gasped loudly, clutching his chest as the massive legal implications finally clicked into place in his brain. You placed a lien on our house. Desmond stammered, his voice weak and completely broken. You legally attached our massive debt directly to the property title. That is exactly correct, Mr. Desmond, Elias replied, smiling a cold, ruthless smile. You have legally owed my client a massive unpayable debt for the past 4 years. And because that specific lien was officially recorded with the county government, it immediately became a senior secured debt on the property. That means it must be fully satisfied and paid off before the sellers can collect a single penny of profit from any future sale. Darnell let out a pathetic whimpering sound from his chair. As a former bank manager, he knew exactly what a senior secured property lien meant for a short sale transaction. He knew that all the glorious equity they had been celebrating was instantly wiped out by my legally binding claim. He had accidentally facilitated the direct transfer of their entire imaginary fortune straight back into my waiting corporate bank accounts. Vivian began to openly weep, her fake tears ruining her expensive makeup. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred burning in her eyes, but she was entirely powerless to do anything about it. You planned this from the very beginning. Vivian sobbed aggressively, pointing a shaking manicured finger at me. You purposely trapped us in this evil legal scheme. I did not trap you, Mom, I replied calmly, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the glass table. Your own blinding greed trapped you. I simply provided the rope, and you enthusiastically tied the knot yourself. Mr. Sterling, the closing attorney cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the devastated family back to the head of the table. He adjusted his reading glasses and opened his own thick leather binder, projecting complete professional neutrality. If we may please proceed to the final financial settlement statement, Mr. Sterling announced, looking at the miserable faces of my parents. Let us review the lethal math of this specific short sale transaction. The property successfully sold to Apex Holdings, LLC, for the total cash amount of $1.2 million. The primary mortgage lender will take exactly $400,000 to completely clear the original defaulted loan. He flipped to the next page of his detailed ledger. The remaining $800,000 in property equity is entirely absorbed by the senior lien held by your daughter Kiara. This massive debt accounts for 48 continuous months of mortgage payments, extensive legal fees, significant early withdrawal penalties, and heavily compounded interest. Every single dollar of that remaining equity legally belongs solely to her corporate holding company. Mr. Sterling pulled out the final official settlement sheet from his binder. He slid the crisp white paper across the polished oak table directly toward Vivian and Desmond. They stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. The final financial calculation is absolute and legally binding, Mr. Sterling stated, pushing a sleek silver pen toward my father. After fully satisfying all your outstanding legal debts to Kiara, the total cash payout you will receive today from this real estate transaction is exactly $0.00. Please sign the bottom line to finalize your complete financial ruin. You have no remaining options and no further legal recourse. The harsh reality of your situation is now permanently cemented in stone. Your fake empire has officially collapsed. You are leaving this room today with absolutely nothing at all to your name. This is the undeniable truth of your completely devastated current reality. The undeniable truth of your completely devastated current reality hung in the stagnant air of the boardroom like a suffocating blanket. The immediate aftermath of that brutally factual statement was an explosion of pure, unadulterated chaos. Vivian let out a sound that was half gasp and half shriek before she physically collapsed backward into her plush leather chair. She began aggressively clutching her chest with both trembling hands, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the expensive silk fabric of her designer dress. She was hyperventilating dramatically, struggling to draw oxygen into her failing lungs, as the sheer magnitude of her permanent financial ruin finally shattered her fragile delusions. Desmond stood frozen next to her, his face completely drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He opened his mouth repeatedly, attempting to formulate a coherent sentence or a forceful demand, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He simply stammered out broken, meaningless syllables, his previous arrogant authority completely destroyed by the irrefutable legal math sitting directly in front of him. The invincible patriarch of the family had been permanently dethroned, and he knew it. Across the polished oak table, Nia and Trey were experiencing their own simultaneous psychological collapse. The arrogant influencer and her fraudulent cryptocurrency husband stared at the final settlement sheet with wide, terrified eyes. They both realized in the exact same horrifying instant that they were about to default on the massive $50,000 loan shark debt they had recklessly accumulated. They had confidently promised the dangerous lenders a massive payout from this exact real estate transaction. Now they had absolutely nothing to give them. Trey began violently sweating, wiping his forehead with shaking hands as he frantically calculated how fast they needed to flee the city of Atlanta to avoid physical retaliation. Nia dropped her face onto the cool glass surface of the table, openly weeping as she watched her luxury downtown penthouse dreams evaporate into thin air. Beside them, Darnell looked like a man who had just received a terminal medical diagnosis. His eyes darted frantically around the room as the full reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He had bypassed standard banking protocols, suppressed foreclosure alerts, and committed severe federal fraud entirely for nothing. He had risked decades in federal prison, assuming he would receive a $200,000 commission. Now he was suspended, disgraced, and entirely penniless. I sat perfectly still at the head of the conference table, watching the spectacular destruction of their fake empire with absolute cold detachment. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or remorse for the people writhing in agony before me. They had dug this massive grave with their own blinding greed and malicious entitlement. I slowly stood up from my leather chair, ensuring my posture was absolutely immaculate. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored black power suit and locked eyes with my trembling father. As the new legal owner of the Buckhead property, the short sale agreement you just blindly signed dictates a very strict timeline, I announced, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the chaotic room. I sliced through their pathetic sobbing with lethal professional precision. You have exactly 72 hours to vacate my premises completely. If you are not entirely removed from the estate by Monday afternoon, I will have local law enforcement physically remove you for trespassing on private commercial property. Furthermore, I highly suggest you do not attempt to take the stainless steel kitchen appliances or the imported light fixtures when you pack your bags. They legally belong to the holding company now, and I will prosecute you for theft. The reality of the streets hit them with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. The 72-hour eviction countdown began the exact second they stumbled out of the prestigious law firm and into the harsh winter sunlight. The ensuing weekend was a blur of frantic, humiliating panic for the once proud elite family of Atlanta. I did not have to be physically present at the mansion to witness their rapid downfall, because my security team provided me with continuous comprehensive updates regarding their desperate movements. By Saturday morning, the carefully constructed facade of black excellence that my parents had worshipped for decades was entirely and permanently shattered. Without the promised $800,000 equity payout, they had absolutely no financial resources to hire professional moving companies or secure a new luxury residence. They were reduced to begging their former country club friends for temporary housing, but the news of their spectacular financial collapse had already spread through the affluent community like wildfire. Every single wealthy friend and fraternity brother who had attended their fake charity gala immediately blocked their phone numbers. They were completely and totally isolated. With no other viable options, my parents were forced to pack their entire lives into heavy-duty black garbage bags. They frantically stuffed their expensive designer clothing, imported shoes, and fake luxury handbags into cheap plastic sacks, while their wealthy neighbors watched the embarrassing spectacle from across the street. The judgmental stares of the surrounding Buckhead community burned into their remaining pride. The neighbors whispered loudly, pointing directly at the chaotic scene unfolding in the grand circular driveway. Vivian refused to step outside the front door, paralyzed by the sheer public humiliation of being exposed as a total fraud. Desmond was forced to drag the heavy plastic bags down the brick steps by himself, his customized tuxedo jacket replaced by a sweat-stained shirt. Nia and Trey abandoned the packing process entirely by Sunday morning. Terrified of the dangerous loan sharks hunting them down, they hastily stuffed 2 suitcases with their most valuable remaining possessions and fled the state in a cheap rental car. They did not leave a forwarding address or offer any financial assistance to my struggling parents. Darnell and Jada retreated to a cheap motel room, entirely consumed by their own impending federal legal battles. The grand family legacy had officially dissolved into dust. The final 24 hours of the strict eviction notice were characterized by profound, desperate isolation. The sprawling mansion that had once hosted elegant dinner parties and exclusive holiday gatherings was now completely stripped of its fabricated glory. Only bare walls and cold marble floors remained. My parents slept on a cheap inflatable mattress in the center of the massive empty living room, entirely stripped of their arrogant dignity. The cold reality of their impending homelessness was no longer a theoretical threat. It was an undeniable physical reality, staring them directly in the face. They had exhausted every single available line of credit, destroyed every personal relationship, and alienated the only daughter who had possessed the actual resources to save them. The massive financial safety net they had blindly relied upon for 4 consecutive years was permanently removed, and they were currently in a terrifying freefall with absolutely nothing to break their devastating impact. I spent that exact same weekend finalizing the lucrative commercial redevelopment plans for the Buckhead property with my corporate attorneys, ensuring the estate would generate massive passive income for my holding company. I slept soundly and peacefully. On the morning of the third and final day, the strict 72-hour deadline was rapidly approaching its ultimate conclusion. I was sitting at the polished glass desk in my Washington office, reviewing a new crisis management contract, when my encrypted mobile device began vibrating loudly. I glanced down at the bright screen and saw the name of my father flashing persistently. Desmond had deliberately bypassed my legal team and called my private personal number directly. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot espresso, savoring the rich, robust flavor, before I calmly pressed the green button to accept the incoming call. I did not offer a polite greeting or acknowledge his presence. I simply allowed the heavy digital silence to stretch across the encrypted line, forcing him to speak first. The confident, booming voice of the proud family patriarch was entirely gone. Instead, a weak, trembling whisper echoed through the phone speaker. The sheer magnitude of his total defeat was painfully obvious in every single broken syllable he managed to produce. "Kiara, please," my father begged, his voice breaking violently as he sobbed into the phone. "We have absolutely nowhere left to go. The banks have frozen every single account we possess. Please, Kiara, I am begging you to show us some mercy. We are blood, Kiara. Family is supposed to take care of family. Let us stay in the small guest house behind the main estate." I listened to his pathetic manipulation tactic with absolute chilling calm. "Blood simply makes you related to someone, Dad," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "Loyalty is what actually makes you family. You have exactly 4 hours left to remove yourself from my private property." I firmly ended the call and blocked his number. The permanent click of the disconnected line echoed in the quiet luxury of my Washington office, finalizing the absolute destruction of their fabricated empire. Over the next several months, the harsh consequences of their blinding greed systematically dismantled every single remaining piece of their lives. Vivian and Desmond were violently evicted from the affluent Buckhead community they had worshipped for decades. Without my stolen financial support or the illusion of the short sale money, they had absolutely no viable options left to explore. They were forcefully relegated to a cramped, run-down two-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. The peeling linoleum floors and flickering fluorescent lights were a brutal daily reminder of the massive fortune they had arrogantly thrown away. My mother, who had once proudly hosted elite country club galas, was now forced to clip grocery coupons and avoid making eye contact with her new neighbors. Desmond, who had spent his entire life boasting about his fake real estate investments, was now reduced to working as a part-time greeter at a local hardware store just to afford their basic utilities. Their spectacular social downfall was absolute and entirely irreversible. Meanwhile, the toxic marriage of Nia and Trey violently imploded under the crushing weight of their massive financial deception. The dangerous loan sharks Trey had recklessly borrowed $50,000 from were relentlessly closing in on them. Terrified for her own physical safety and completely stripped of her superficial influencer lifestyle, Nia aggressively filed for divorce. She publicly blamed Trey for their entire financial ruin, desperately attempting to salvage whatever tiny shred of her digital reputation remained. It was a pathetic attempt at damage control that completely failed because the internet never forgets a viral humiliation. She was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment, working a minimum wage retail job, folding sweaters at a mall she used to shop at for luxury content. Trey disappeared completely, likely fleeing the state under the cover of darkness to avoid the violent collection tactics of his angry creditors. His prized fake crypto businesses and his arrogant persona were entirely erased from existence. Darnell faced the most severe and permanent consequences of all. The federal banking investigation I had orchestrated swiftly uncovered a massive systemic trail of institutional fraud extending far beyond the Buckhead estate short sale. Darnell was formally indicted on multiple counts of severe federal banking fraud and wire manipulation. He was stripped of his professional licenses, his personal bank accounts were entirely frozen by the government, and he faced a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in federal prison. The moment the federal indictment was officially unsealed, Jada ruthlessly abandoned him. She did not hesitate to pack her expensive designer bags and walk out the door, taking whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left. She aggressively filed for divorce, claiming she had absolutely no prior knowledge of his illegal activities, leaving Darnell to face the terrifying wrath of the federal justice system completely alone. I was forced to rely on an overworked public defender because he could not afford to hire private legal counsel. The arrogant banking manager was completely destroyed, while my former family drowned in the deep toxic consequences of their own malicious actions. I officially took physical possession of the Buckhead mansion. Walking through the heavy front doors for the first time as the sole legal owner was an incredibly surreal experience. The massive, sprawling estate was completely silent, stripped entirely bare of the expensive furniture and fake artifacts my parents had used to project their illusion of extreme wealth. But the foundational bones of the house remained strong, and I possessed the exact vision necessary to completely resurrect it. I immediately hired the most elite demolition and interior design crew in the entire Atlanta metropolitan area. I gave the lead project manager one very strict, non-negotiable directive. I wanted every single trace of the tacky, pretentious aesthetic of my mother completely eradicated from the premises. I wanted a total rebirth. The highly skilled demolition crew arrived the very next morning, working with aggressive precision. They violently ripped out the outdated imported marble countertops, smashed the gaudy crystal chandeliers into dust, and tore down the heavy, oppressive velvet drapery that had suffocated the natural light for years. The massive sweeping staircase where Nia had once posed for her fake social media broadcasts was completely stripped and refinished to a beautiful natural wood. We aggressively knocked down several interior walls, opening up the claustrophobic floor plan to create a massive flowing space bathed in gorgeous natural sunlight. The transformation was swift, brutal, and incredibly satisfying to witness. Every single swing of the sledgehammer felt like a physical manifestation of breaking the generational curses that had plagued my existence. I watched them tear away the ugly wallpaper and felt an immense physical weight lifting from my shoulders. Over the next 6 months, the brilliant design team executed my exact vision flawlessly. The previously tacky Buckhead mansion was completely reborn as a breathtaking modern sanctuary. We installed warm, rich hardwood floors, imported from Europe, custom minimalist cabinetry, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows that perfectly framed the lush green landscaping of the private backyard. The cold, pretentious museum quality of the previous decor was entirely replaced with warm, inviting textures and elegant contemporary art sourced from brilliant local artists. The sprawling kitchen where my mother had once cruelly banished me to eat holiday scraps was transformed into a massive state-of-the-art culinary masterpiece featuring an enormous white quartz island and premium professional-grade appliances. I completely reclaimed the toxic space and forcefully bent it to my exact will, turning a house of painful memories into a stunning monument of my own absolute independence. It was no longer the house of Desmond and Vivian. It was exclusively the domain of Kiara. Many people in my elite professional circle quietly assumed that I would feel incredibly lonely living in such a massive estate entirely by myself. They fundamentally misunderstood the profound difference between isolation and absolute peace. Cutting off my toxic bloodline did not leave a gaping, empty hole in my life. It aggressively cleared away decades of heavy, suffocating debris, removing their constant malicious demands, their aggressive entitlement, and their endless draining drama, created a beautiful, massive space in my daily existence. For the first time in my entire 32 years of life, I was able to breathe deeply without waiting for the inevitable harsh criticism or the next sudden financial emergency. I was no longer a silent automatic teller machine or a convenient family scapegoat. I was simply a successful, powerful woman living entirely on her own magnificent terms. The quiet evenings in my new home were filled with joy and absolute serenity. Instead of feeling empty, my transformed life rapidly filled with people who genuinely loved, valued, and profoundly respected me. Elias, my brilliant, ruthless attorney, became a frequent and cherished guest at my home. We spent countless evenings sitting on the massive, newly constructed outdoor patio, drinking premium imported wine and discussing lucrative corporate acquisition strategies. My loyal crisis management clients, the very same elite investors who had successfully bankrupted my father at the fake charity gala, frequently attended elegant, intimate dinner parties I hosted in the new dining room. I intentionally surrounded myself with incredibly brilliant, supportive, and fiercely loyal individuals who celebrated my ambitious success rather than desperately trying to exploit it. The toxic concept of blood loyalty had been entirely replaced by the beautiful reality of chosen family. I was finally completely, truly home, and I had never felt more securely supported in my entire life. The ultimate emotional closure arrived exactly 1 year later, as the crisp autumn chill signaled the arrival of the Thanksgiving holiday. I was standing in the center of my massive, newly renovated kitchen, wearing comfortable, expensive loungewear, sipping a hot cup of premium espresso. The house was filled with the warm, beautiful aroma of roasting spices, fresh herbs, and baking bread. I was meticulously preparing to host a spectacular holiday feast for 20 of my closest friends and most trusted colleagues. I was roasting a massive, beautiful truffle-infused turkey using the exact same delicate recipe my mother had callously rejected 1 year prior. The heavy brass knocker on the front door sounded breaking the peaceful morning silence. My private security detail, who now permanently monitored the gated entrance of my estate, handed me a small plain white envelope that had been delivered via certified courier. I flipped the envelope over and immediately recognized the frantic, shaky handwriting scrawled across the front. It was from Vivian. It was a desperate, pathetic, handwritten apology letter, likely begging for a second chance, seeking financial salvation, or requesting access to the luxurious life she had thrown away. I stood entirely still, looking at the physical manifestation of the woman who had spent my entire life violently trying to break my spirit. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering curiosity, and absolutely no guilt. I did not even bother to tear the envelope open to read her desperate lies or manufactured apologies. I calmly walked over to my home office, stepped up to the heavy-duty industrial paper shredder, and dropped the unopened letter directly into the spinning metal blades. I listened to the sharp, satisfying sound of the paper being aggressively destroyed into 1,000 tiny, unrecognizable pieces. I turned around, walked confidently back into my breathtaking modern kitchen, and began preparing my beautiful feast. I pulled the massive roasting pan from the oven, letting the rich, earthy aroma of black truffle and herb butter fill the expansive space. The golden brown turkey crackled perfectly in the heat, a culinary masterpiece that I had prepared entirely with my own hands. I transferred the heavy bird onto a beautiful silver serving platter, garnished it with fresh sprigs of rosemary, and walked out of the kitchen. The grand dining room of the Buckhead mansion was glowing with a warm, inviting light. A breathtaking Thanksgiving spread was laid out across the long custom mahogany table. Crystal wine glasses sparkled under the modern geometric chandelier, and elegant minimalist centerpieces of white florals and eucalyptus tied the entire aesthetic together. But the most beautiful part of the room was not the expensive decor or the lavish food. It was the people occupying the space. The 12 seats surrounding my table were not filled with toxic relatives or fake high society VIPs. There were no arrogant crypto bros, no manipulative influencers, and no disgraced bank managers desperately hiding federal indictments. Instead, those seats were filled with individuals who had actively earned their place in my life through mutual respect and unwavering loyalty. Elias sat near the center, laughing easily while pouring a premium vintage Pinot Noir for the guests. Beside him sat my loyal executive team, the brilliant men and women who helped me build my public relations empire from the ground up, working late nights and fighting fierce corporate battles right by my side. The billionaire venture capitalist who had effortlessly shut down my father at the fake charity gala was seated across from them, sharing a hilarious story about a recent corporate acquisition. His wife, a brilliant philanthropic director, was passing a bowl of garlic mashed potatoes to my lead public relations strategist. These were my genuine friends. They were my deeply trusted colleagues. They were the chosen family I had meticulously built for myself over years of hard work and shared mutual respect. I carried the truffle-roasted turkey toward the table, and every single conversation naturally paused. The entire room turned to look at me with expressions of genuine admiration and profound respect. Elias immediately stood up from his chair to help me place the heavy silver platter precisely in the center of the table. He offered a warm, appreciative smile that completely lacked any hidden agenda or selfish motive. It was a look of pure platonic love and unconditional support. The contrast between this exact moment and the nightmare I had experienced exactly 1 year prior was absolutely staggering. Last year, I had driven 7 grueling hours through a brutal sleet storm, terrified for my safety on black ice, only to have the front door of this very house violently slammed in my face. Last year, I had stood shivering on a freezing porch, holding a roasted turkey, while the people who shared my blood demanded I go eat scraps in a tiny pantry. They had looked at me with sheer disgust, treating me like an unwanted servant interrupting their fabricated luxury. They had valued their fake country club status over the physical safety and emotional well-being of their own daughter. Tonight, no one was blocking my entrance. No one was telling me I did not belong at the adult table. No one was demanding I hide in the kitchen so I would not ruin their pristine aesthetic. Tonight, I was the undisputed queen of my own castle, surrounded entirely by authentic love and unwavering support. I took my rightful place at the absolute head of the long table. The plush leather chair was comfortable and commanding. I looked down the length of the room, watching my chosen family laugh and pass beautiful dishes of roasted vegetables, artisan breads, and rich cranberry sauces. There was absolutely no tension in the air. There were no silent judgments or passive-aggressive insults being traded over the dinner plates. No one was scheming to steal equity or commit bank fraud. There was only the sound of clinking silverware, joyous laughter, and the deep, comforting resonance of true belonging. The heavy, suffocating dark clouds of generational trauma had been completely eradicated from this property. I poured myself a glass of vintage champagne, the golden bubbles rising rapidly to the rim of the tall crystal flute. I felt a profound sense of absolute victory radiating through every single cell in my body. I had successfully dismantled a toxic empire, reclaimed my stolen wealth, and built a beautiful modern sanctuary of peace right over the ashes of their blinding greed. I slowly stood up from my chair at the head of the table, holding the crystal champagne glass high in the air. The room immediately fell into a respectful quiet as my friends turned their attention toward me, expecting a holiday toast. I smiled warmly at the people gathered around me, feeling an immense wave of gratitude for their presence in my life. Then I turned my gaze away from the table, looking directly forward, piercing right through the fourth wall to address you, the viewer. They called me a disappointment. I stated, my voice projecting with absolute crystal clear confidence. They looked me dead in the eye and told me I did not deserve a seat at their table. They thought they held all the power because they relied entirely on my sense of familial obligation to fund their delusions of grandeur. They assumed I would always be the quiet, obedient financial safety net who would willingly accept their blatant disrespect just to keep the fragile peace. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, my posture immaculate and my expression fiercely proud. But they completely forgot one incredibly crucial detail about how the real world actually operates. I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify the absolute truth of my next words. When you are the one funding the lifestyle, you do not beg for a seat at the table. You buy the whole damn house, and you evict the people who do not know your worth. I turned my attention back to the wonderful people seated around my table. The people who saw my value long before I ever owned this sprawling estate. I raised my glass slightly higher, catching the light of the chandelier. To knowing your worth, I announced brightly. To knowing your worth, my chosen family echoed in joyous unison. I brought my glass forward, clinking it against the crystal flute Elias held out toward me. The sharp, beautiful sound of the fine crystal ringing through the air was the perfect final note to the ultimate symphony of my revenge. I took a slow, satisfying sip of the expensive champagne, letting a radiant, victorious smile spread completely across my face. I had lost a toxic family, but I had gained the entire world. The warm, glowing light of the dining room slowly faded into pure absolute black.